Thank you. Thank you so much, Bindiya, for joining me today.
Thank you for having me here.
So, as you know, we are focusing on remote interpreting this season, and we talk about all kinds of things in terms of remote interpreting. Usually, what I do is I start off the interview with a question that pertains to the name of the podcast. So, what does feel like magic to you?
What does feel like magic to me? I think like the processing, like sometimes like, when you switch between two languages, like, the term code switching, like you go back and forth, like sometimes like I get so fascinated. I do that all the time, but to me that is magic because you think like it's linear, like, you speak in one language, then you set your mind, like reset, go to another, but then I do such a lot of back and forth in a same sentence, same paragraph, and that sometimes I'm frustrated, but at the same time, I feel that that's magical too.
Great answer. So, what is the short version that you tell people when you talk about your work?
I would say I'm an advocate for language access, and I have always been involved with grassroots level, community level work. I worked in refugee resettlement, healthcare, and I'm an interpreter, Nepali interpreter. I was most likely the first one to be certified in Massachusetts for the language of Nepali, same for the court system in Massachusetts, and first CCHI certified Nepali interpreter. So I'm proud of that. And then I believe like in some way I have paved the way for other interpreters for Nepali, like the language of lesser diffusion at one point, but I think it's getting more and more common these days. So I have over the years, I think I have, no matter what my position has been, I have been a full-time interpreter, part-time interpreter, but I have always stood by language access in all my while wearing different hats in all my positions. So I would like to be introduced that way.
Great. So tell me a little bit more about how you got started as an interpreter, how you got started in the field, and what work looks like for you right now.
So how I got started, I was a grad student at Clark University. The year was 2006. I got a call from international office at Clark University saying Great Brook Valley is looking for a Nepali speaker to interpret for two of their patients, and they could not find anyone in the area, so they started contacting local universities to see if they have any international students who spoke the language. So that's how I got connected to Sue at Edward M. Kennedy at the time. And I had never ridden a public bus at that point. I was so sheltered. I had just been in US for 3 months, and my only exposure was inside Clark University. No car, international student, never, I mean, too scared to ride a public bus because people kept saying, Worcester is not a town that you want to venture on your own. And my heart was pounding when I got on the public bus and went to Great Brook Valley, and I interpreted for a refugee assessment for two patients, and that was my first experience, and it felt great. And after that, the refugee population in Massachusetts was increasing, and I was presented with an opportunity to get trained. So at that point, I learned that there is a training. My first one, I did without a training. I did my best. But then looking back, I don't know what I did. Uh, so then I went on to get trained in 2007, 2008.
That's actually a really quick move from doing your first assignment with no training to getting training. I can tell you it wasn't like that for me at all. And I think that's a sign of how much it's changed. Even though the first time I interpreted it was actually very similar. I was in college and I got called by the equivalent, the international office because they had a student from Angola who was there, and he needed to get surgery on on his shoulder, and they wanted me to accompany him. And just like you said, it's like I didn't have any training. I didn't know what I was doing. And I tell this to my students a lot. knew so little that I never even looked up the muscles or the names of things in the shoulder. You know, he was a basketball player, and I don't remember much, and I'm sure I didn't do a very good job. But they talked, I remember rotator cuff, and I had no idea, you know. Then the doctor started talking about the muscle that they're, so, you know, you
Yeah,
don't.
I mean, I had no idea what the healthcare centers look like in US. That was my first time walking into a medical facility. Like I didn't know there's like a medical assistant and then a nurse and then a doctor, kind of like a series of professionals who enter the room, because back home you go, you see a doctor. So, I mean, that was a very unique experience and very enlightening one as well, because personally I had not accessed any kind of like medical treatment in US, and it was the first time walking into a health center. And Aaron M. Kennedy, like the diverse population it serves, like walking into a waiting room was overwhelming. But yeah, so I get goosebumps when I think about that encounter. And but then yeah, like definitely did not think about looking up medical words or anything. Like I had no context whatsoever at that time.
Yeah, and I think that's what we see, you know, when untrained, inexperienced, bilingual, you know, fully bilingual people go to interpret. You can get the job done, but there's a lot that could be better. But as I was saying, it's great that you so quickly got training. I didn't work as an interpreter for years, and I don't even put that in my, you know, I don't consider that as part of my years of experience, because for years I didn't do anything in translation or interpreting, but I still worked a good couple of years as a translator without any formal training. So good for you for
Yeah.
starting, you know, so quickly. That's great that you did that. Could you tell me a little bit more about the type of, or the context of the patients that you work with? So I don't know too much about the population that requires Nepali interpreters, but we did have one at the hospital that I worked at, and I know a lot of them were Bhutanese refugees, and you've talked about that. So could you, for those of us that aren't familiar with that, could you talk just a little bit about where they're coming from, what context, you know, the everything that goes into them being here in a very different culture, right? In a very different medical system.
Yes, so Bhutanese refugees, they come from Bhutan. So Bhutan is a teeny tiny country that's it's in the same belt as Nepal. There's like a part of India and then Bhutan. So it's kind of like in the same belt, and ethnically it's the same population, even like the small portion of India that's between Nepal and Bhutan. I mean, there are Nepali speakers there. So the reason is primarily Nepali speaking. And in 1990s, Bhutanese, there was a sort of ethnic cleansing by the king of Bhutan, like, you know, who belongs like more to I mean, like who has more Mongolian roots, and these Nepali speaking, like they had more Aryan or Indian roots. So these people were kicked out of the country. So they walked through India or traveled through India, and then they came and were in refugee camps in the eastern part of Nepal. So they stayed in refugee camps for about 20 years, like almost 17 to 20 years on. And as I grew up, I was always listening to news where I read about King of Nepal had bilateral talks with King of Bhutan to solve the refugee issue and all of that. And it never struck to me as something I was like, oh, like this news again. Like, I mean, I never ever researched more about the refugee issue while growing up, but then unfortunately they were never able to go back to their country, and Nepalese government did not issue them any kind of legal paperwork or the citizenship. So when this happens, like, you know, UNHCR steps in and they normally look for third country resettlement. That's how a lot of refugees come to US. So 2007 was the first year when Bhutanese were first few Bhutanese families were brought to US, and Massachusetts and being one of the leading state in refugee resettlement and Worcester being one of the really diverse cities, I was doing an internship at Lutheran Social Services, and they gave me an internship because they were expecting a group of Nepali refugees and they wanted someone there. When you get like an influx of a new group of people, they need to see a doctor. I mean, they have all of these community needs. Their kids need to go to school. They have to go to DTA. So that's how the need for this language started. So initially, it was more of a community and medical needs. And then people started assimilating, integrating. They started getting driver's license. They started driving, and then they started drinking and driving, and then they started having domestic disputes. And then suddenly I was approached by a trainer at Massachusetts trial court, like, oh, we are suddenly seeing an influx of all of these Nepali cases in the court system, which we never had before. So that's how I got pulled into a court interpreter training from the medical, because I was a trainer for medical interpretation. So I think in some way I was lucky to be in a like a right place at the right time, and willing to be trained and willing to explore, at the same time training a lot of other Nepali interpreters as well. So now, like, there's like quite a few, but then so that's how the needs shaped up, and the field started growing.
That's great. I love the how you described the evolution from, medical interpreting needs to justice system needs.
Yes, yeah, it started with immunization. Like, I mean, first few appointments, let's get the kids immunized, let's get them to school. So that was the first ones, like I still recall. Even in medical, you can see the progression. Like, it's a primary care refugee assessment, you start getting referred to specialists, then you start going to a bigger hospital. So I think that was the evolution of my career at the same time, and it matches very closely with the assimilation of the refugee group in US or in Massachusetts.
Well, thank you. So, what is a typical work week look like for you? And we are interviewing you in what is it, June 2020, and we're still in the pandemic, according to most people, including myself. And so feel free to talk about, I guess I'd like to know a little bit what it looks like before that, because it's changed so much for all of us, and hopefully our lives will go back to, I don't know, 70%, 60% normal. And so I'd like to know what your work week looked like before, let's say before February of this
Yeah.
year.
Yeah, I have always had interpreting jobs and my other jobs as well. I always did a mix. And my other job in the healthcare was also very closely, tied to working with the community of Nepali people and interpreting for them. But then necessarily my position was not interpreters. And then at the same time, as a trainer, you don't have like a constant flow of work. You teach when there are classes and then not. So right before the pandemic, I was in the process of in some way transitioning, building up my profile more as interpreter trainer. I was involved, I just had started my position at Found in Translation, as a director of interpreter education. Last year, I worked with them as a consultant when they had when they were doing their training. And I have like a community case management experience. So I had a little bit of that. And at the same time, like in the evenings, I was doing remote interpretation from my home studio, and just as a freelancer, picking up assignments out in the community and in the courts whenever my schedule allows. So it was a mix of a lot of things, and I was busy. I was really busy because it was a lot of juggling, because when you work as a freelance, as an interpreter, when you are not a staff, you don't know. It's kind of setting up a shop. Some week you may have 10 assignments, some week none. So I was going with the flow. It's kind of like anytime my family told me like, how your week shaped up this way, I was like, you know what, it's kind of like the customers, if they want to hire you, if there is a need, I need to do it. Like, who knows when the court case would pop up. Like, at times it's predictable, but then at times it's not. You get called for a restraining order, or you get called for a last minute arraignment. So I was doing all of that, just like juggling a lot. And as soon as the pandemic started, a lot of in person stopped all of a sudden. Like, it was like from a busy week to like no assignments at all. The court stopped, some of the medical appointments that I took in the community, that all stopped immediately. So what did not stop was my remote work, because I was doing that from my studio and there was still a need. And I believe a lot of medical facilities were leaning more towards remote in absence of in person. And even at my remote setting, like where I work remotely, I was seeing decrease in assignments because there were no primary care appointments, only emergency appointments. And the nature of assignments changed from like primary care, regular ER visits, to a lot of COVID patients, drive-in testing, screening testing. Like literally the iPads were shoved into the car. So you would know like you are interpreting in a tent, like, you get to see the backdrop. And ICUs, a lot of ICUs, I mean, definitely interpreting for healthcare providers with a glass shield, like PPE mask, like, it just changed. Like the nature of encounter just changed. But then, like I said, like even now, June 20, like we are not back to in-person appointments. And in my training capacity, I have been doing a lot of work around how to move the training remote for the fall at Found in Translation. And that has been an evolutionary journey in itself, because you are so used to teaching in class, and now suddenly you have to move all your like infrastructure to remote, and then make sure you are delivering the same level of training and ensuring the same level of engagement. So that has really kept me busy and pushed me to uncharted territory, like teaching online and getting myself trained. What would be the best platform? What would be the good learning management system? How do we ensure students have access to technology? I feel very glad that I'm still doing my remote work, and I'm still preparing for a remote class, and doing some remote assignments, but not as much as before. And still supporting the families. And I think like the silver lining for all of this is I hear from a lot of my colleagues like how assignments have dried up, and people really worrying about the language access during pandemic, and for all the right reasons. But sometimes, like, when you really look at yourself, like, do a self-reflection, at times I feel okay, because I feel like I'm contributing to the solution in some ways. And like, be it 3 hours of remote interpretation or trying to put up a remote course for the fall, like in some way, like, there's productivity, like in it, and that really fuels me. And another thing that I should not miss about my work week now is it's fragmented. I have almost 4-year-old, so I work 1 hour, I take 15 minutes, I work another hour. So just the focus, and just like I think everyone's life has changed. So that's my work week now. Like I would say productive but fragmented, and really trying to work where the future is uncertain. And sometimes it's difficult when you're trying to focus when you don't know what the future looks like, because it's kind of you are adapting and being flexible all the time.
So I definitely want to talk to you more about Found in Translation and what that organization does and what you do is it. And we'll leave that toward the end, because I want to take the opportunity to kind of hook what you were saying about remote interpreting to talk about your decision about a year ago, right, to focus
Yes.
more on remote interpreting. So tell me more about that.
Yes. So I was doing till last year, I was doing all in person and telephonic. Yes. Like there was phone calls in between. And then I really never considered telephonic as remote at the time, to be honest. Like I was like, you know what? It's a part of the job. Sometimes you're on the phone, and those are like very few here and there. And just like when I was not, when they needed something last minute and I was not able to get there on time, or something like that. So we resorted to telephonic as a last, like lender of the last resort.
And did you do so? Just tell me a little bit about that telephone at the time. So what was that? Was that when you were freelance at the hospital sometimes, or from
Oh,
home? What?
Yes, I think I was freelance at the time, and sometime it would be for the court, sometime it would be for the community case managers or the nurses, like, who needed to communicate something about the medication urgently to the client without necessarily making a home visit. Like, so just, oh, I was there yesterday, but this is a follow up. Like, don't do this, don't do that, like some post appointment
Mhm.
instructions. And sometimes for the court, like, someone gets arrested and they cannot have an interpreter for the same day. So we use some telephonic for that.
And you would be at home. Where were you?
Yeah, I was at home, and at the time, like, to be honest, like, I had cell phone only. Like, I would, like, either be in a car with the locked doors and or be in a room, like go to a room and pick up a call. And then some of the immigration court ones that I did, like, that needed to be in a landlines. So that was the extent of like remote or over the phone that I was doing before I got formally trained for remote.
Okay. And so then you decided to go to invest more in remote.
I have been a trainer, and over the years, especially last few years, students started asking more and more about remote. Like, we always talked about, oh, different modes of different kinds of interpreting settings. You could work for an agency, hospital, you could work remote, you could be a freelancer, you could be a staff. Like, it was like a general conversation to a point until people really started showing a lot of interest. Can I work from my home? What is remote? How do you do that? Like, I have heard someone do that. Tell me more. So as an instructor, I felt really ill equipped to answer those questions because I was not doing it myself, and the questions were increasing. So I felt that if the whole medical field in some way, the interpreting field, is moving in that direction, then I need to know what is happening. I cannot be going in front of a group of class and then just say whatever I like about remote, like without having an actual experience. And I mean, I could not justify that. So I had slowly started showing an interest in remote. And at the same time, one of my colleagues said, oh, there's an opening at such and such company. Do you want to explore? I did. I went through the application process, and I was hired, and then that company sends their own equipment. Then I started getting boxes and boxes of equipment, and I got so overwhelmed because until that point, I had never thought of like, oh, I need to have a studio in my home. Like, I had a home office, but then I was not really concerned about the background or the windows or the curtain or the light beaming in, headset, extra monitor, like, all of that, like, that felt overwhelming. But then I kept reminding myself, I'm here to learn. Like, this is a learning experience. Like, I wanted to do this so that I could learn and, like, have some experience so that I can take it back to my class. So I set up the studio, and it was a week-long training. I started doing that, and I still had a full-time job. So it was very, very time-wise, it was very difficult juggling. But I did some like late night hours, evening hours, so that I could get a feel of video remote interpreting, like in a studio setting, like, of course, a home studio. I was not going to a call center or the office, but it was enlightening in many ways. Like, it was overwhelming and intimidating at first, but then as you do it, I really started enjoying some aspect of it. And yes, like, it was a learning curve and a steep one at first, but then as interpreters, like, all the professionals, they adapt so easily to any setting. And I think it's just like wired into us who are in this field. Like, they're passionate about it, they're passionate about language access, and they just adapt. And I think your adaptation kicks in, like, be it the video remote or telephonic, it kicks in. And I started really enjoying, like, I would not say all, but then some aspects of it were really rewarding.
So tell me what aspects were rewarding?
So I'll start with examples, because I think the best way to say it is with examples. So the first one was, I had a shift on New Year's Eve, and I was so mad. I was really like, who works on a New Year's Eve? Like, I could not get a substitution. I had to work my hours, and I was just not happy working that day, and being locked in my studio when my family patiently waited to have dinner and then celebrate, like, have a new year. So But then I got a call from a labor and delivery department of one of the hospitals. Woman was in labor. I was in that call for 2 to 3 hours, and the baby was delivered. And I was just so elated after that. Like then I thought about like how would that woman be would have access to a Nepali medical interpreter in the evening hours, like wherever the hospital was on the New Year's Eve, and that just put things in perspective for me. I was like, I'm doing this for a reason. Video remote interpreting is there for a reason, and I mean we all have like pros and cons about like do I want to do video or not. We all have our preferences, but at that point I felt like at the end of the day, like it's about access and it's about that woman. It's not about me, like or me being in the room or me using a headset. It really does not matter. I'm a voice like and my presence there, like be it in person or a video, like I mean, it would not have mattered at that point. So that just put like things in perspective. And that was one situation where I felt really moved, and I was happy. Like I had the best celebration after I got done with my shift. But then my mood was like great after that. And another was about an old man who was on life support, and doctors had to talk to his wife. I believe she was in her 70s, like looking at her, and she had to make that difficult decision to tell the doctors that it's okay to take the life support off her husband. Adult children's present in the room. They spoke English, but the doctor insisted that he wanted to talk directly to the wife. and and that appointment was really moving. Like I mean, I had done some end of life, but then not not that kind. So it was really moving. Like I had to tell my supervisor that I needed a break after that appointment. I went, like I said, told my husband I needed to talk. Like I need 5 minutes. Like just talk
Yep.
to me. Like whatever. And then another that really struck with me was baby was just born. Not one of the big hospitals, and baby had seizure, and the hospital staff at that hospital had to immediately decide to transport the baby to a big regional hospital out in the city. So mom was right out of delivery. Dad was nervous because their newborn had a seizure, and it was about interpreting for a transportation consent. I had not done that before. So it said like how your baby would be transported in an ambulance, how your newborn, like, just hours, like how your newborn would be transported in an ambulance, how long it will take to get there, how the other medical team will meet, who will be in the ambulance, who can go. Of course, mom was not in a position to go. It was the dad. I could see the nervousness in the voice. I could see the look on mom's face. And I mean, that situation, how would they have, like, unless they had a staff interpreter, like, that's a different situation. And sometimes, like, when you are in one of those areas where there's not a big population for that language, you don't have the luxury. All the hospitals won't have it. That's a reality. They won't have a staff interpreter. So just being able to put someone on and through a video remote interpreting who's looking at you, who can feel you, like, and it was another emotional encounter. And especially because I worked evenings, I got to see a lot of so ER visits and urgent kind nature of appointments. So those really were rewarding, because as an interpreter of a lesser diffusion and not being a staff interpreter, like, being a freelance, the kind of assignments that I did through video remote interpreting, I would never have imagined to do those appointments in person. Like, it would have taken me years. Like,
Right.
what I
Right.
saw in 1 year is so rich and so, in some ways, so powerful than what I would have gotten an opportunity to do in person, like, for
Hmm.
my language. And also the access, I felt like there was, like, at every point, like, there was an access issue. And also, like, it keeps you on your toes, because when you enter an assignment, sometimes you don't know what it is about. Like, another interpreter may have been disconnected. They may be talking about a procedure. It could be endoscopy, it could be a surgery, because sometimes like doctors say, oh, are you clear about this procedure? Like, you really don't know what procedure, like, like things like that. So you really have to be on your toes, and I think like that really pushed me to enhance my performance, and then that really pushed me to enhance my performance, and that experience was really rich.
That's that's so interesting on many levels. I've been taking notes of things to talk about because you gave me such good examples. I think the first thing is related to the last thing that you talked about. I just wanted to relay to you that, for me, for several years now, I've been telling myself, well, medical interpreting isn't linguistically challenging, and it's one of the reasons that I work more in conference interpreting, because I don't, I wasn't getting that challenge. And so it's really interesting to hear you say that in a different modality. So by doing video remote, given the type of situations that you're dropped into, that then you do get that linguistic challenge. So that's really good to hear. And it reminds me of the idea of looking into that, just to stay within the healthcare interpreting field and still get that reward, which is is a good one. But I want to touch upon a couple of things that you said. You gave examples of such fundamental encounters, in both senses of the world of the word. Encounters being interpreter mediated event, right? So where you have an interpreter working with two or more speakers that don't share the same language, and then an encounter in life, because you mentioned examples that are life and death, and the as you mentioned, the core reason that medical interpreters are so important, and that which is language access. And I think you just exemplified that so well when you talked about the woman giving birth, the woman who and I love it. I love that the provider insisted, as you said, on having the interpreter there. And this is something that a lot of people don't understand, is that the family members shouldn't have to interpret. In many cases they want to, in a life or death or end of life situation like that. I would think that most of them would not want to, and so that's what's so wonderful to see that doctor really insisted on that, because it would not make any sense for the family to have to be going through that and then also interpret and be impartial.
And I think for providers, like, the ease of access, like, not having to tell their assistant and the secretary to arrange someone to come into the room and then have that uncertainty. I think in some way, like, looking, I mean, I'm not a provider, but then looking at it, I think they must have felt empowered that they actually have a choice to have an interpreter, and it's easy, versus I need to check 3 boxes because I can have interpreter for this patient, versus, okay, I'm just going to call and then have interpreter here. And I mean, they're busy, and some of these encounters, they're unanticipated. It's not something that you can plan and then have interpreter there. And like I said, like, staff interpreter does solve a lot of issue, but then let's be honest, for Nepali, like, staff interpreter, like, I
Right.
mean, how many? How many?
It won't make sense.
Yeah.
Yeah, it really is. When we talk about language access, there has to be access, and access means, like you said, that it's easy. And we know that providers and other English speakers or other people that are part of an institution and users aren't. If it's difficult to do, they're not going to do it. And that's completely understandable. They're working in an environment that doesn't allow them to prepare ahead of time. And I think video remote interpreting is, if it's set up well, and it is just, making a phone call or getting the iPad or getting the video phone, and in a matter of minutes, as they say, you can get someone that's going to win every time. When I talked to Vanessa Costa, who's a director of interpreter services at Cambridge Health Alliance, she spoke about that too, where they had a whole, I mean, very robust department of staff interpreters, and the providers would have to wait 10-15 minutes to get one. And she was talking, most likely about languages that were not of lesser diffusion. And of course they're going to, they started picking the remote interpreters because it would only be a couple of minutes, if even 1 minute. And in her model, as you know, it was, their staff interpreters, and she made a really good case for why that is the best of all the worlds, right? Is to have the remote access, the easy access, but they're local people that know the patients, know the system.
Yep.
But it's different for languages of lesser diffusion like Nepali, because you wouldn't have staff, and you wouldn't have local people, and that's the whole point. That's the, you can help somebody make those decisions and go through those moments.
And a lot of interpreters find it difficult to stay in a field because it cannot guarantee a full-time employment. So people have to go on and have like a second job or a third job, and sometimes, like, interpreting is the one that gets lost in the shuffle, although they are trained. So I think, like, having like some sort of like remote opportunity or something to balance your career and finances, I think it may be a motivation for a lot of interpreters to stay in the field, because like especially now, like the on-site interpreting, like, if you lose assignment, you really have to go and, like, I mean, you need to run your household, you need to do what you need to do. But then, I mean, how can we situate interpreting as a profession people would not drop but keep?
Exactly. Yes, thank you. It really is how to keep interpreting as a profession. And I think a lot of us, I've seen this with almost everyone I've interviewed, a lot of us do a couple of different things. And sometimes it's in the field of interpreting. Most of us, it's been within the field of interpreting, like yourself, training, or different, court interpreting and press briefings or political debates like Ernest does. Just a variety of things within it. And it keeps you motivated, and yes, it keeps you financially afloat. And some of the fields pay more than the others, and so that allows you also to do the ones that are more necessary in many ways for language access and are more rewarding for the reasons that you said, but unfortunately don't pay as well. Which is a whole other thing, but
another topic where we can go hours and hours.
Right. And we can't solve all the problems, right? In one podcast episode. In the time that we have left, let's talk about Found in Translation and your work for them.
Yes. So I was initially introduced to Found in Translation as a trainer. Like, I was a language coach. I used to teach there when they had Nepali students. So I was a language coach over the years. And then this year, I'm more involved with them. Especially now, we're looking at how to launch our program remote. And the program is unique in a way that it's a nonprofit, and it's a free medical interpreter training program. And it not only teaches bilingual women interpreting skills, but then it's a job placement program. So there's like financially literacy, professional development. We work on their resume, we take their headshot, we work on we have like sessions on professional attire, we match them up with Dress for Success. And one of the biggest barrier for women to come to the class is either, like, for low income women, is transportation, childcare. So we provide on-site childcare, and we provide all the materials, books, everything are for free. And after that, like, the transportation, so like they get T-passes to come to the on-site classes. The whole point is we want to eliminate all the barriers that women are facing so they can actually go back and integrate into the workforce. So I mean, we call it like a job placement program, but then how, like, we utilize medical interpreter training as a means for a job placement. And there's like extensive career counseling. professional development and one-on-one support, mentoring, a lot of that goes into. It's kind of like reshaping someone's career in so many ways. So yeah, so that's how like it's really unique in its mission to reduce injustices, and then also at the same time tackling the language disparity issue in healthcare. So
Yeah, it's a beautiful program. For those of you listening that aren't from Massachusetts, you might not have heard of it, but it really, I mean, listen to what Bindiya just said. So it's free, it's completely free childcare. And when I found out about that, I was like, yes, of course. How can women go to classes at night or at any time if they're not helped with who's going to take care of the children? And having all the materials and then doing all that development on top of it, that's really, really good. A excellent model to take
yeah,
elsewhere.
most interpreting programs, like, they do the training and then you are on your own to find a job. You don't even know where to start after the training. You have a certificate that says 60-hour medical interpreter, but unless you have your personal network, it's very difficult to actually find that first assignment or first job. So our program extends beyond the training, so that's what and I think like the goal is like people will stay in the field, people will work in a field and have a meaningful, gainful employment out of this training.
Yeah. And the other thing is, for those of you listening, that T-Pass means like subway, or it's public transportation. That's what it's called
Yes, yeah.
in Boston, because the front-end translation is based in the Boston area. Okay, tell me a little bit more, as we end up, a little bit more about being a mother and working in the field.
I would start with the positives. Like, like interpreting is a field where you have flexibility. Like, as a freelancer, I get to set my own calendar. So that has been huge. And so like, with like juggling with parenting, that's really huge. And one of the, I mean, I'm just going to share an example. Like, my daughter, fingers crossed, so far is a bilingual. She speaks both Nepali and English fluently. And then she had this enlightening thought that she can trick her babysitter because she does not speak Nepali. So she was taking her for a breakfast, and she loves her so much. So she asked her what she wanted to have, and my daughter just made up a word and said she wanted to have something. So she showed pictures like, do you want to have this or that? Like, she felt bad all day long that she was not able to get her the food she wanted. I came back from work, and then she asked like, what is this? She said this word in Nepali, and I could not like make her say the English word. So I was not able to get that for her, like with like a very small face, like really sad. And then and the word is like, it's a non-existent word. Like, she just played a trick like on her. So so I think like, so the parenting and like, I mean, like your work has such a big influence on your children. Like, she sees me interpret, and then just that the language, like the beauty of the languages and the fact that she can trick people, or like, having an extra language is a strength, is something that she's learning at such a young age. Like, I mean, for all the wrong reasons, to trick her sitter, but still it's a strength to be speaking another language. And I think the influence, and then just like, because all of us, like, we want our kids to be bilingual, like preserve the culture, like all of us immigrants, like we want to preserve the identity, like have some like values that's from our culture that's very dear to us. So I think that's the positive influence of interpreting. And I think she's learning that. And also the boundaries, like, so I think setting up a home studio, it has really helped me teach her boundaries, like, how she cannot like come to the room, this is my workspace and I work. And I think that's the positive influence. And so, and but then like, I think like the in general, like, parenting is feeling guilty as well in so many ways. Like, as a mom, like I have my usual list of guilts that I feel like I'm not able to do this, I didn't do that, she's still not yet learned the Nepali alphabets, or this, that. But I think I forgot the question. So what was the question?
No, you answered it. I just wanted you to talk a little bit about being a mother and being a professional.
Yeah.
Because it's, yeah, there's so many of us, and the issues are similar, and at the same time there's always, something particular to your experience. But yeah, I
Yeah.
hear you. The guilt thing is something that's it's a real issue, and there's, a lot of people talking about it, and how to get rid of it, and how to really let go, of that idea, because
Yeah.
there's so much pressure for us to do everything, including being an amazing mother.
Yes, yeah. I mean, like we have been like very free flow with homeschooling. Like, instead of like really coming up with homeschooling plans, we installed a swing set so she can go out and play. So,
That's wonderful. That's
I know she
wonderful.
needed something to burn her energy. So that was our quarantine survival strategy. We installed a swing set. She loves it, and I think that's like teaching in so many ways. But then at the same time, like, I think like mothers are really taking a lot of hit, like, because I think like women in general work more with women, and they're more tolerant, and it's okay like if my daughter comes and sit on my lap when I'm having a meeting, but then it's really not okay when she goes and sits on my husband's lap, because he has to then switch off the camera. I mean, I don't switch off the camera. I think people I work with are more tolerant, and I mean, in general, I think women have it difficult, like when some of this adversity happens, and the work is opening, childcare is not, like, I have seen a lot of mom worry about like what to do, and I mean, I'm not perfect, but I have just said as long as they are happy, healthy, and eating and running, like that's the basics I have come down to. So
Yeah, it's got to be the basics at this point.
yeah.
So we talked a lot about how you love your work. That is usually how we finish up the interview before we get to the lightning round of questions.
Yeah.
So just in sum, what about your work do you love, and how does that fit in with your life in general? This idea of loving your work.
I think like in general, like there's so many problems in the world. I would like to like end with a very short story. So once there was a forest that was on fire, all the big animals, lions, elephants, tigers, they were all like, they were all sad. They were just like staying there, like really sad that their home is burning away. And there was this like little hummingbird that was going to the water, taking a drop of water, coming back, putting it in the fire. So all the animals said, are you stupid? Like, do you really think you are going to put off a fire by just like your tiny, teeny, tiny mouth? You're the smallest of the creature. And hummingbird said, I'm doing my part. So that's the story I remind myself when I get very frustrated with all the problems out there, language access, women issues, injustices, and then I look at my work, and then I can say I'm doing my part. That's what I love the most.
Oh, that's beautiful. Thank you. Well, now we're going to do the lightning round. So this is just a
Okay.
series of questions with, one word answers when possible
Okay, I
at the
try.
very end. So notepad or digital pad?
A notepad, sticky notes,
Coffee or tea?
coffee,
For language learning, are you a more visual learner, or do you learn more by listening?
listening.
Do you have a special object or totem that you carry around or that you have with you when you interpret?
Oh, not really, actually. Like, I have not, I don't have anything. But then, I mean, like after having my daughter, I had to go back to Nepal on my own, and one of my friend had gifted me like an elephant and a baby elephant. It's like this teeny tiny, and I carry that in my purse. So I think that goes with wherever I am going. So I think that's the object, and I think every time I want to revamp my purse, I was like, I'm going to take this out. It's getting bulky, but that still stays there. So it's some connection.
Nice. freelance or in-house?
Like in staff interpreting?
Just for yourself, it's like, would you rather be freelance or in-house?
Like freelance.
And what about consecutive or simultaneous?
Both. I cannot pick. I do both.
Is there a term or an area when you work that kind of doesn't seem to stick, or that that you have to look at before you start a job because you tend to have problems with it? It could be in anything, but
No, I think I'm having more and more problems with like the tech jargons that we're using now, like, finding the equivalent for like patient portal. Like, I think I say one thing one time, another thing another time. Secure connection, communication, like, those kind of things that we're using more and more. Our digital strategy. Like, I don't think I mean, I think I need to work on a vocab list or something, but I think I say a different thing every single time based on the context.
yeah, yeah, and I think you had mentioned before we started recording about that term about portal, and how to.
It's a concept, it's not a word, so I think I struggle with those a lot. Yeah. And then a funny story is, when I was doing my medical interpreting training, like, kidney is the word that I never learned, because yes, there is a word for kidney in Nepali, but then people use kidney so commonly that I didn't realize, like, until 1 year down the line, that there is a word for kidney in Nepali.
Interesting. How do you said they use it a lot. What is it kind of a metaphor for something else, or how do they use?
No, I think people just import the word, like heart attack. Like, people hear it and people just say it. Like, there is a word for that, like blood pressure, like things like that. People find it easier to use the English word,
Oh, you're
and
saying in
sometimes,
English. Okay.
yeah. So I just said like kidney. Like, I thought kidney was like, oh, kidney in English, kidney in Nepali, like, but then there is indeed a Nepali word for kidney.
I see what you're saying. I see. So that they say the term in English. Yeah, that
Yeah.
definitely happens.
Yeah.
In Brazil, people who have lower back pain often say that their kidneys hurt. That's why I was asking. I was like, I wonder if there's some kind of, and
Oh,
that's
I think, yeah, we have
per
something
person.
like that in Nepali. When people have shortness of breath, they say they have asthma. Always, every single time. And doctors like, you have asthma? Like, nope, it's shortness of breath. Like, so that's
Right.
an always sticky thing, like, where you need to clarify and
Yep.
like all the time. Yeah.
Yeah, because and then do you interpret the first time, just say, but you don't know, because maybe this person actually has asthma,
Actually
right?
has asthma, yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think I once did interpret that my kidneys hurt, and the doctor was like, but kidneys, really, is your kidneys hurting? Like, how do you know it's your kidney? And I was like, okay, I'll go back to saying my lower back.
Yeah.
Okay, and the last question is, can you name a favorite podcast?
I'm so new to the podcast.
That's okay. So
So I don't have
so it'll be Not Quite Magic.
yes, yeah, fair to say that, yes.
I'm kidding. Well, thank you, Bindiya. This has been a real pleasure. I can imagine bringing you back for different topics. I think I will do a season about training and teaching. But thank you so much for your time and for talking and sharing your experience today.
Yeah, thank you for having me here. Like, it's really nice when you can come and share your thoughts, because interpreting can be isolating at times. So thank you really for the opportunity.
You're very welcome. And I'll see you soon.
Yeah, see you soon.